Today's political storytellers, the BJP, the RSS, and their ecosystem love rewriting history. They call Nehru weak, they call the Kashmir war avoidable. They say if Sardar Patel was left alone to act, he would have recaptured Pak occupied Kashmir. But they hide the truth of those desperate 7 days, October 20 to 26, 1947, when India and Pakistan, barely 2 months old, were thrown into a war neither was ready to fight. This podcast is particularly for those gentlemen who believe in the Bharatiya Janata Party's and particularly Amit Shah's narrative on Kashmir. Even if you are an ardent supporter of the BJP and Modi, I still urge you to go through this podcast. You may still form your own opinion, but understand how India and Indians and our army struggled and made sacrifices so that today many of us can sit and rewrite history. This episode remains a tribute to all those who fought for and saved Kashmir. By October 1947, India and Pakistan were two nations in name but one in confusion. Files, freight trains, and soldiers were still moving between the two capitals. The partition had divided the land, but not yet the system that ran it. Both armies were under British commanders in chief. In India, Sir General Robert Lockhart; in Pakistan, General Sir Frank Messervy. The same manuals, uniforms, even mess tables were in use on both sides. Entire battalions were being split, with half their men joining Pakistan and half staying with India. But the strangest irony was that the war was funded by the same treasury. The Reserve Bank of India still acted as Pakistan's central bank until September 30th, 1948. It printed currency for both dominions and cleared payments on behalf of both governments. So, when the first Indian troops were airlifted to Srinagar in October 1947, their pay, the war expenses, technically came from a shared financial pool, the last remnants of the British Raj's budget. The Partition Council, chaired by Lord Mountbatten, was still debating how to split gold reserves, securities, and debt. The official division of cash balances, about 400 crores for India and 75 crores for Pakistan, was completed only in December 1947, nearly 2 months after the Kashmir War began. In those early weeks, invoices for military rations, fuel, and ammunition were still routed through joint accounts. Even war expenses were met from the Common Defense Fund that existed before partition. In short, the two countries were fighting their first war with each other's money. Both militaries had only fragments of an organization. There were no complete ordnance depots, no separate training manuals, no local ammunition factories, which were yet operational. The army trucks that carried troops to Pathankot were stamped Government of India 1946. On the other side of the border, Pakistan used the same vehicles with only the number plates repainted. Against this backdrop of financial confusion and divided command, two nations that barely existed on paper marched into their longest war, one that would last 18 months and define the subcontinent for generations. The partition had ended, but the empire shadow, in its generals, its money, and its mistrust, still ruled both nations. Even after independence, both armies answered to British mentors. Lord Mountbatten, India's Governor General, urged caution. Field Marshal Claude Auchinleck, Supreme Commander of both dominions, warned if India and Pakistani troops fight, every British officer will resign. That meant no open war orders, no bold deployments. In those early weeks, India's sovereignty existed on paper, not yet in the command rooms. In Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh still dreamed of neutrality. He ruled a Muslim majority state as a Hindu monarch, imagining a Switzerland of the East. But his dream collapsed under rebellion and invasion. In Punch, ex soldiers rose in revolt. Pakistan tightened the standstill agreement, cutting off supplies to Kashmir. And by 22nd October, Operation Gulmarg began, a covert invasion disguised as tribal jihad. Thousands of Pashtun Lashkars, armed and guided by Pakistani officers, poured through Muzaffarabad. They burned towns, looted Baramulla, and killed civilians by the thousands. Baramulla, once a quiet Kashmiri town, became a graveyard. Raiders looted homes, burned churches, and massacred civilians, including nuns and doctors at the St. Joseph's Mission. Their greed delayed their advance, and that delay saved Srinagar not by days but by hours. The blood of Baramulla gave India one more day to fight back. On the night of 25th October, Hari Singh fled Srinagar with his family and treasury. From Jammu, he wired Delhi, sent troops immediately. Mountbatten, Patel, and Nehru replied with a single condition: accede first. VP Menon flew to Jammu. By the evening of 26th October 1947, the instrument of accession was signed. In a small room in Jammu, under the dull light of a table lamp, Maharaja Hari Singh finally signed the instrument of accession. VP Menon stood witness. That single signature bound Kashmir to India and set off a chain of events still echoing through the subcontinent. At the first light next morning, Dakota DC-3 plane lifted off from Palam Airport. That first airlift carrying the first Sikh regiment changed history. The Battle of Srinagar had begun. While the Maharaja fled, one man stayed to fight. Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah, the Sher-e Kashmir. Released from prison only weeks earlier, he rallied his National Conference volunteers to defend Srinagar. Unarmed civilians dug trenches, guarded bridges, and guided Indian convoys through fog and fire. Abdullah's speeches crackled on the radio. This is not a war of Hindus and Muslims. This is a war for our land, our honor, and our future. His leadership gave India political legitimacy, proving the defense of Kashmir was not as a ruler's plea but people's resistance. When the airlifted troops landed, they faced impossible odds, yet the bravery of a few turned the tide. Major Somnath Sharma, PVC, 4th Kumayu, at Badgam he held his post, though outnumbered 7 to 1. His last message: the enemy is only 50 yards away, I shall not withdraw an inch. He fell in the battle, becoming India's first Paramveer Chakra. Brigadier Rajendra Singh, MVC J&K State Forces. With barely 150 men, he blew up the bridges at Uri to slow the raiders, buying India 2 days. He died fighting to the last, the savior of Kashmir. Major Diwan Ranjit Rai, MVC 1st Sikh Regiment. He led the 1st Airborne Detachment into Baramulla. He held the line long enough for reinforcements to arrive and fell defending his men. Captain Thapa Veerchak at Skardu, he and his garrison resisted a 6 month siege through winter of 1947 and 48, When ammunition ended, he led bayonet charges until the position was overrun. Havaldar Piru Singh, PVC 6 Rajputana rifles. At Titwal in July 1948, his platoon was annihilated. Yet he kept advancing alone, clearing trenches one by one. He fell with a grenade in hand, his courage immortalized in legend. These were the men who turned retreat into resistance and fear into faith. Their blood drew the first red line on Kashmir's snow. When India went to war in October 47, its army was not fully Indian. At the top still sat British generals, men like Sir Robert Lockhart, India's first commander in chief, and Sir Claude Auchinleck, the supreme commander of both India and Pakistan until late 1948. Their loyalties were complex. The crown had gone, but the empire hadn't yet left. And so, when the tribal invasion of Kashmir began, the men who truly led India into its first war were not those at the top, but those who defied hesitation from above. Two names stood out: K.M. Cariappa and K.S. Thimaiya. Both would become legends of the Indian Army. Both served under British command, and both risked their careers to do what the British wouldn't do: fight back without restraint. At the time, Major General K.M. Cariappa commanded Indian Army operations in the western sector, particularly Jammu and Punjab. While the British officer hesitated to confront Pakistan directly, citing fears of escalation, Cariappa pushed for a full defensive realignment, securing supply lines to Kashmir, reorganizing the 161 Brigade, and planning counterattacks beyond Naushera and Rajouri. He was clear: defensive hesitation is defeat by design. Kadayappa's early field plans ensured that India did not lose the entire Western Front while the Kashmir War unfolded in the north. Later, as India's first fully Indian commander in chief in 1949, he would insist on complete Indianization of the armed forces, removing British officers who had stayed back as advisors. Cariappa symbolized the strategic mind of Indian independence within uniform. He worked through the system but never bowed to it. While Cariappa managed strategy, Brigadier Thimaiya commanded in the field from Srinagar to Jodhila and finally Leh. He was among the first officers to fly into Kashmir, personally surveying battlefield positions. When British officers argued that opening a second front in Hyderabad or Gilgit was logistically impossible, Themaiya bluntly replied that the map of India cannot be drawn by clerks in Delhi. It was Thimaiya who led the daring Jojila operation, driving tanks up to 11,000 feet through snow in 1947-48, an impossible feat at that time, and reclaiming Ladakh. Even British generals admired his audacity, but disapproved of his independence. His leadership exposed a truth the empire did not want to see: that the Indian army no longer needed its colonial minders. Both men clashed with the British command structure that still dominated military policy. The British chiefs repeatedly opposed launching offensives across the ceasefire line, refused simultaneous operations in Kashmir and Hyderabad, and insisted on maintaining political balance with Pakistan even at India's expense. Cariappa and Thimaiya saw this as a moral paralysis masquerading as diplomacy. They were the first Indian officers to assert operational independence, setting the tone for the new national army whose loyalty was to India alone, not to imperial hesitation. While the British commanders still signed the orders, it was the Indian hands that fought, Indian minds that led, and Indian hearts that saved the map of India. Kadeppa gave the army its spine, Thimaiya gave it its soul. 78 years later, politics rewrites this history. The BJP blames Nehru for losing Kashmir, ignoring that India barely existed as a functioning state when the war began. It was Nehru's persistence, Patel's coordination, Menon's diplomacy, and Abdullah's people that saved Kashmir. It was the Indian Army's raw courage that held the valley, not any politician's rhetoric. To forget this week is to forget the price of unity. October 20 to 26, 1947, the week that changed everything. A week when two nations fought for their soul and India survived because its soldiers did not run. Thank you for watching. I am Ajay Prakash.